Well, let's go ahead and see how much oil we've got in the catch can. Alright, I'm not gonna lie, there's actually a lot more oil in here than I expected. So here is the emptied contents. Oh, nice and dark and sludgy as well. So this is with roughly 1,500, maybe 2,000. Definitely no more than that worth of driving. So this is what we saved from entering back into the engine. Greetings guys, and thank you so much for tuning into this video. As you can tell by the title of this video, we're going to be talking today about oil consumption in the 350Z. So if you are new to this platform, you're going to learn quickly that 350Zs burn a lot of oil / consume a lot of oil. Now I wanted to make this video particularly because there is a ton of information out on the internet, in the forums or videos on YouTube talking about oil consumption in a 350Z, and there's a lot of those videos that unfortunately do have some misinformation, we'll say, or things aren't exactly the way they should be. There's a lot of people with videos out there that say this is going to be the fix for your oil consumption, you know, change the put a catch can on it, or change to this type of oil, or do this or do that. And I just wanted to give you a nice overview of exactly what to expect because of some of that information not necessarily being the most correct. So a lot of the reasons why I don't like some of the videos that are out there is because they talk about catch cans or the PCV valve or changing to a different type of oil, but ultimately they don't actually address the issue, the root issue of why your DE is going to be consuming oil / burning oil. And the root cause is because it's a DE. So first and foremost, guys, I do really want you to realize that if you have a DE, it doesn't matter what kind it is going to consume oil. So the fact of the matter is these engines just consume oil, and it is completely normal for them. Now obviously a brand new one isn't going to consume as much oil as a high mileage one like the one that I have. However, do realize no matter what, they will consume oil because they are a DE. And the root problem, or rather the big reason why the oil consumption is going to happen, is going to be the internals of the engine, the piston rings. So the way these engines are, inevitably, unfortunately, there is seepage between the walls of the cylinder walls and the piston rings, and you're ultimately going to consume / burn oil. Now obviously, if you were to get a new engine / if you were to rebuild the engine, let's say you're going to bore out the cylinder walls and get you know, bigger sized piston rings, then you're going to solve the root problem. However, most people don't do that. So most people are looking for an easy fix, or they just need to understand why it's happening. And that's why you get a lot of videos saying put a catch can on it, or switch to this type of oil, or make sure that you change the positive crankcase ventilation valve, which are all important tips and tricks, and we're going to be talking about them in this video. But I want you to know that they do not address the root cause of the problem. Yes, putting a catch can, as you saw the oil that came out of it, is going to be beneficial for your DE, because we're going to be preventing that oil from getting back into the engine. If you're not exactly sure how that works, check out my catch can video on the channel. And of course, such as what I just mentioned, changing the the PCV valve in order to allow proper flow is also going to be important. So these are tips and tricks in other people's videos that you should do or should pay attention to, but know that they don't address the root cause of the problem. Another thing that we're going to be talking about is oil type, the weights in particular, and what you should be using in your 350Z or shouldn't be using in your 350Z.
40 weight, 50 weight.
40 weight sounds nice.
Real quick, if you hear somebody tell you, or you read in a forum, that putting a catch can on the 350Z is going to prevent the 350Z from burning more oil, on a technicality, yes, because the catch can is stopping the oil from re-entering the engine where it's going to get burnt off. So yes, you are prohibiting some oil from getting burnt. However, you're not prohibiting it from being consumed. It's still going to pass through the positive crankcase ventilation valve and end up in the catch can. So you are doing good for the engine by keeping it out so that it doesn't burn through. However, it's still not going to keep you from having to top off your engine with oil. You're still going to end up looking at that dipstick and seeing that the oil level has come down. All right, next let's go ahead and talk about oil. So specifically oil weights. Now, the oil for the 350Z is supposed to be 5W30. Now, I have here some 0W20. This is a jug that I'm getting prepped to change the oil in my Mazda. So that's why obviously this weight is not specific to the 350Z. However, as you know, engineers are always going to tell you, make sure you do not use anything in your car but what the engine is designed to use. So if the Nissan 350Z manual says use 5W30, you should use 5W30. Now, should you, particularly in the event if you have a high mileage DE that is consuming oil, can you change the oil type? Because you're going to see a lot of that in the forums and hear a lot of people talking about it. And the answer is yes, but it does depend. Now, big thing is really going to depend on a couple of things. If you have a new DE and it's not consuming oil, you probably should stick to the 5W30 that the manufacturer recommends. Now, if you have a high mileage DE like the one that I have, then that's a scenario where you might want to change your oil type. The other big thing that it's going to depend on is where you live, the temperatures that you're actually going to be running or operating the vehicle. So for example, I don't drive my 350Z in the winter. However, I do start it intermittently. Sometimes I'm backing it in and out of the garage just to move it around or work on other vehicles. So for me, it is important in winter time that I have a nice start. And here where I live, it does get very cold. So I do get below zero temperatures. So for me, I do have to pay attention to the W number, which the W stands for winter. I have to pay attention to it because if I go too thick, then I might have a rough start. See, the thing is that oil, as you know, has a different viscosity than water, and that's going to change depending on the temperature. So if you picture a ball, like a marble, for example, or a ball bearing dropped down in some water versus dropped down in honey, which is more viscous, it's going to take a longer amount of time for it to go down, and that's what oil is about. The oil is going to lubricate the engine. That's why we need it to be oily, not like water. Now, if we take the same example and we have a certain oil at room temperature and a certain oil that's been frozen, the same thing's going to happen. Is you're going to see a difference in how the object travels through it, and that has to do with the oil's viscosity. So for me, in winter time where I do live, where I'm going to be below zero temperatures, I don't want my oil when it's cold to be super thick, because then the oil pump isn't going to necessarily be able to start the car nicely, or the car is going to have a little bit more problem starting, or it's going to be just harder for it to pump that oil through the engine. So you don't want a rough start. So for me, I pay attention to that front number. So in a high mileage engine where the components are more worn out, there's more spaces, a lot of people are going to say use a thicker oil, and yes, you certainly can. So for example, in my 350Z, I use a 0W40. Now some of you might be like, oh, okay, thicker oil, so the 30 part which Nissan calls for, you're increasing to 40, but why the heck are you decreasing the first number from 5W to 0W? Well, that has to do with the oil's viscosity map, if you will. So to explain why 0W40 is still within the range of what the temperature levels of 5W30 are, I'm going to send you on over to my friend Jason from Engineering Explained, and he's going to explain exactly how that works.
If you look at a graph of temperature versus viscosity, it will look something like this. So in blue, we have a 0W40 oil, like what's found in the Corvette, and then our red line is a 10W30. And so what you'll see is at cold temperatures, the 10W30 is thicker. However, as that oil reaches operating temperatures, the 0W40 is thicker. And both oils continue to get thinner as they increase in temperature. So as a general rule, going lower on the hot rating number is a bad idea. But what if you went thicker with the hot rating? Well, generally speaking, it's not terrible, though again, not recommended. In specific cases where a car sees a lot of track time and the oils are getting into much higher temperatures, sometimes you'll see cars recommend thicker viscosity grades when you're on the track to make sure the viscosity is still high enough at those higher temperatures. Now, what if you went lower with the first number? So say your car recommends a 10W30 and instead you put a 5W30 in it. Well, if you look at the overall viscosity range of each of these different oil grades, you'll see that the 5W30 range falls entirely within the 10W30 range. So really the engine wouldn't be seeing a viscosity that it hasn't seen before. But if you went the opposite direction, say your car recommends a 5W30 and you put a 10W30 in it, well then at cold temperatures, it's going to be seeing a much thicker oil, and so you could run into cold cranking and oil pumping problems. If you use a higher number here, or a lower number here, bad things can happen. If you use a lower number here or a higher number here, it's not as risky.
Now that you saw that demonstration, you know exactly that even though I'm decreasing the first number and increasing the second number, I am still within the range of what the manufacturer originally calls for. And by increasing the second number from 30 weight to a 40 weight, that's how I'm achieving a little bit of thicker oil in my particular 350Z application, so that I am not particularly or perhaps potentially consuming as much oil. Should you do that for your 350Z? Not necessarily. I am not telling you what to do. I'm just providing information and explaining to you the reasoning behind this and why I do what I do. And again, a lot of this is really ultimately going to depend on the two biggest things: the life of your engine, how it's doing with its oil consumption, and where you live. Another very common thing that you're going to hear 350Z owners talk about or read in the forums is oil pressure, and in particular low oil pressure. Before we talk about low oil pressure though, let's just take a moment to thank our sponsors, Rockstar Energy, for sponsoring this video. If you won't stop, can't stop, want to party like a rock star, Rockstar Energy is your drink. I'm completely kidding. Obviously, Rockstar Energy is not the sponsor of this video. There is no sponsor of this video. So with that in mind, if you like what you're hearing, if you are enjoying the content, if you are learning, and if you appreciate what you're seeing, please give a like and a subscribe so that I can keep on making some content for you guys. Now, coming back to oil pressure. One of the things with oil pressure is that when these engines become old, if you will, and not operating the way that they should be, a lot of people will try to combat their oil pressure issues by changing the weight of the oil, just like we talked about a moment ago, which you can certainly do. But I want to mention a couple of things about the oil pressure. Oil pressure at idle at warmed up temperature should be anywhere between 1315 to 2022 or so. It is very difficult to read on the gauge on the 350Z, and importantly, there are three things that we need to talk about with the oil pressure that can be a culprit of why the oil pressure might actually dramatically drop. And those three things are that the oil sending unit can be bad, the gauge itself can be bad, or third, the actual engine does have a problem, potentially either with the oil pump or some sort of constriction going on, not allowing proper flow, or just the engine, being unfortunately on its way out. However, it is very, very common for the oil pressure sending unit to be bad, and it's very easy to replace. It's just a little tiny part which is right next to the oil filter. So if your oil pressure is just not at all the way it should be, you might want to consider changing that. If you change that and it's still not working properly, it could be the gauge itself, so you can check the gauge itself. Now, it could also be a bad gallery gasket. You see this on the HR models quite a bit more than the DEs. It'd be kind of rare if it's on a DE, but with the gallery gaskets, oftentimes you'll actually get a code. So the car will throw a code. I believe the code is a P001 or a P002. Don't quote me on that. And if none of those are the culprit and your sending unit is fine, the gauge is fine, then you might want to consider playing around with the weight of the oil in order to combat that oil pressure. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, just drop a line down below and I'll be sure to get back to you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you soon. And here is where my oil pressure stands at when the car is warmed up. It's been running for about 30 minutes now.